"Rebecca, honey, we need to talk." My mother's voice, usually so saccharine, had a brittle edge to it that sent a shiver down my spine. I was still basking in the glow of graduation, the scent of fresh parchment and new beginnings lingering in the air around me. My cap and gown was still draped over my desk chair, a triumphant silhouette against the late afternoon sun. My father sat beside her on the living room sofa, his usual jovial demeanor replaced by a stern, unyielding expression. A folder, thin and innocuous, rested on the coffee table between them. My heart began to pound a slow, heavy rhythm against my ribs. I knew this wasn't about congratulating me on my summa cum laude honors. This was about something else entirely. Something cold, calculated, and utterly devastating, and it would change everything. Before I continue the story, please subscribe. I need to reach 1,000 subscribers so I can keep bringing you stories like this every day. It's just one click for you, but it means a lot to me. My family has always operated under a very specific, unspoken contract: conditional love, generously applied to my older brother, David, and sparingly doled out to me, Rebecca. I was the reliable one, the practical one, the one who excelled academically and never caused trouble. David, on the other hand, was the charming rogue, the eternal project, the one who always needed a fresh start or a helping hand. My parents, Maria and Robert, perfected the art of subtle manipulation, their affection a fluctuating currency, always tied to my compliance or David's latest drama. From a young age I understood my role, the steady, unwavering anchor while David was the perpetually drifting ship. If there was a family crisis, I was the one expected to fix it. If David needed money, my parents would conveniently forget to pay for my extracurriculars, implying I should save for his needs. It was never a direct order, always a suggestion, a soft sigh, a disappointed glance that conveyed volumes. I remember being 10, David 12. He'd crashed his bike, not seriously, but enough to dent the frame and scratch the paint. My parents rushed him to the emergency room, fussing over every scrape, while I, who had been riding behind him and witnessed the whole thing, was told to be a big girl and wait at home. Later they asked me, "Rebecca, why weren't you watching your brother? You're so responsible." My responsibility, even then, was less a compliment and more a burden, a convenient excuse for their own selective attention. It was a theme that would echo throughout my childhood. When David struggled in school, tutors were hired, special programs arranged. When I aced my classes, it was met with a brief, "That's nice, dear," before the conversation swung back to David's potential if only he would apply himself. My achievements were simply the baseline, expected, never celebrated with the same fervor as David's minimal efforts. College was the ultimate test of this dynamic. I earned a full scholarship to a prestigious university, a source of immense personal pride. My parents, however, framed it differently. "Oh, it's so wonderful you got that scholarship, Rebecca." My mother would say, a hint of something unsaid in her voice, "It means we can focus on helping David get back on his feet." David, meanwhile, drifted through various community colleges, never finishing a semester, constantly in need of tuition for courses he rarely attended, or rent money for apartments he quickly got evicted from. My scholarship, far from being a testament to my hard work, became a financial buffer for their endless enablement of David. I swallowed my resentment, telling myself this was just how families were, that I was lucky to be independent. But the constant undercurrent of their favoritism was a corrosive force, slowly eating away at my sense of worth. My efforts to assert myself were met with immediate resistance. When I chose a challenging major, they worried it was too much for me, subtly suggesting I switch to something easier so I could have more free time. Free time, I knew, that would inevitably be filled with their demands. When I secured a coveted internship, they immediately asked if I could put in a good word for David, despite him having no relevant experience. It was like living in a hall of mirrors, where my reflection was always distorted, always warped to serve their narrative. The peace, I maintained, was a fragile thing, bought at the cost of my own voice, my own needs. I was a frog in slowly boiling water, barely noticing the heat until the very end. The boiling point, or rather the sudden icy plunge, came not during my college years, but as I stood on the precipice of my future, diploma in hand. My 4 years at university had been a grueling but ultimately liberating experience. Away from the constant gravitational pull of my family, I thrived. I discovered passions, forged genuine friendships, and built a life where my worth wasn't tied to my utility. I excelled not just academically but personally. I even met Alex, my partner, who would become my anchor in the storm that was brewing. Alex, a brilliant and grounded man, was the first person who truly saw Rebecca, not just as the responsible daughter or David's sister. He accompanied me home for breaks, witnessed the subtle digs, the overt favoritism, the endless cycle of David's crises, and my parents' unquestioning support. He didn't interrupt, didn't accuse, but his quiet observations were like a steady drip of truth, eroding my carefully constructed defenses. "Rebecca," he'd say gently after a particularly draining family dinner where David had been lauded for simply showing up on time, "do you ever feel like you're playing a different game than everyone else?" Or, after my mother had sighed about David's latest financial setback, "Does it ever occur to you that your parents' help might actually be hindering David's growth, and yours?" Each question was a gentle, yet powerful, probe. The biggest eye-opener came during my senior year. I was applying for graduate school, something I'd dreamed of for years. The application fees alone were substantial, but I'd saved diligently from my part-time jobs and internships. My parents, who had boasted about my acceptance to various relatives, suddenly became vague about financial support. "Oh, Rebecca, we'd love to help, but David just had this opportunity come up. It's a bit tight right now." The opportunity turned out to be David needing a new car after totaling his previous one, a gift from my parents just 6 months prior. I paid my own application fees, of course, and was accepted into my top choice program. My parents congratulated me with a perfunctory nod, then immediately pivoted to David's new ride. Alex simply held me that night. "You deserve so much more, Em. More recognition, more appreciation." His validation was the crack in the dam. I started saying no, small no's at first. "No, I can't fly home every weekend to help with that family project. I have studies." The shock was palpable. "But Rebecca, it's family." My mother would lament. "You're neglecting us," my father would intone gravely. The guilt, a familiar phantom, would try to grip me, but this time, Alex was there, a solid shield against their emotional manipulation. He reminded me of all the times they'd taken advantage, all the times my needs had been ignored. He was my compass, guiding me away from the treacherous waters of their influence. It was a slow, painful shedding, but with each refusal, I felt a little lighter, a little more myself. I wasn't just responsible Rebecca anymore. I was Rebecca, forging her own path. The events that immediately preceded the living room confrontation were a carefully orchestrated, yet ultimately predictable, series of betrayals. My graduation, meant to be a moment of shared celebration, became the backdrop for their grand plan. I had invited my parents and David to the ceremony, hoping that for once we could simply exist in a space of shared joy. I even splurged on nice restaurant reservations for a celebratory dinner afterward. But even then, the subtle digs began. My mother, seeing me beam with pride after the ceremony, remarked, "Oh, Rebecca, you look so tired. All that studying must have taken a toll. You should really relax more, like David." David, meanwhile, managed to arrive late to the ceremony, missed my name being called, and then complained loudly about the parking. The celebratory dinner was where the undercurrent of unease truly began to surface. My parents, instead of asking about my future plans, kept steering the conversation back to David's latest, brilliant idea, a vague concept for a tech startup that, like all his previous ventures, lacked any real substance or funding. They spoke with such enthusiasm about his potential, completely glossing over my recent academic achievement. I noticed a subtle tension in Alex's jaw, but he remained silent, observing. The bill came, and my father, usually quick to snatch it, made a show of looking at his watch. "Oh, is it that late? Maria, darling, I think we have that early appointment tomorrow." It was a thinly veiled maneuver to leave me to pick up the tab, a common tactic. I paid, a familiar pang of resentment, but also a growing resolve. This was the last time. The next morning, the day after graduation, was when the true hammer fell. My phone rang, an insistent, jarring sound. It was my mother. "Rebecca, honey, your father and I need to talk to you. Can you come over right away?" Her tone was unusually solemn, devoid of its typical syrupy sweetness. A cold dread seeped into my stomach. I knew this wasn't about congratulating me, or even about David's latest need. This felt different, more permanent, more ominous. I called Alex, my voice tight. "Something's wrong. I think they're going to pull something big." He offered to come with me, but I knew this was a confrontation I needed to face alone, at least initially. I needed to see their unadulterated faces, to witness their intentions without interference. I arrived at their house, the familiar warmth of home replaced by an unsettling chill. My parents sat on the living room sofa, side by side, almost like a unified front against an invading army. The folder, thin and professional, lay on the coffee table. My father cleared his throat, adjusting his tie, a nervous habit. My mother wrung her hands. "Rebecca," my father began, his voice surprisingly firm. "Your mother and I have had a long discussion about your future and about David's future." My heart hammered. This was it. The conversation I'd been unconsciously bracing for my entire life. The words that came next, however, were still a punch to the gut, a betrayal far deeper than I could have imagined. They were about to reveal the true cost of their transactional love. "Rebecca," my father began, his voice devoid of its usual warmth, "your mother and I have been discussing your future. And, well, David's. Now that you've graduated, and you're so independent, so successful on your own, we've decided it's time for a change." He paused, looking at my mother, who offered a weak, tight-lipped smile. My stomach clenched. I knew what was coming, or at least, I thought I did. I braced myself for the usual speech about how I was so self-sufficient and David needed more help. What came next, however, was far more shocking, far more devastating. "We've decided to reallocate some of our resources," my mother chimed in, her voice carefully modulated, as if discussing stocks rather than a child's future. "We want to make sure David has every opportunity to succeed with his new venture. It's a very promising idea, and it requires significant upfront capital." My father nodded gravely. "So, we've decided that the funds we had set aside for your graduate school, and any other future support, will now be transferred to David's account to help him launch his startup." The words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. My graduate school funds, the future support, transferred to David. It wasn't just about money. It was about a complete and utter dismissal of my future, my ambitions, my years of hard work. It was a blatant declaration that David's pipe dreams held more value than my tangible achievements. I felt a cold wave wash over me, momentarily chilling my anger. This wasn't just conditional love, this was a public disinheritance, cloaked in the language of parental sacrifice. "So, you're cutting me off?" I asked, my voice flat, devoid of emotion, a stark contrast to the swirling tempest inside me. My mother's face twisted into a mask of injured innocence. "Oh, Rebecca, don't be so dramatic. We're not cutting you off, we're simply prioritizing. You're so capable, you'll find a way, you always do." Her words, meant to be reassuring, felt like a slap. My capability was, once again, their excuse to abandon me. My father, emboldened by my apparent calm, added, "It's for the best, really. David needs this leg up. And frankly, you've always been so independent, we figured you wouldn't mind." The sheer audacity of it. They were stripping away my future and expecting me to applaud their generosity towards David. Then my father pushed the folder across the coffee table towards me. "And this," he said, his voice dropping to a lower, more serious tone, "is a document we'd like you to sign. It's a formal acknowledgement that these funds are being reallocated." Just a formality, really. My eyes scanned the header. Release of financial obligation. My name, their names, David's name. A clear, legally binding document, releasing them from any future financial responsibility towards me. They weren't just reallocating funds, they were attempting to legally disown me. My hands trembled as I picked up the document. The betrayal was so complete, so coldly calculated, it took my breath away. And then, a new feeling surged through me, hot and powerful, pure, incandescent indignation. The document in my hands felt like a death warrant for the last vestiges of my hope for a normal family. Release of financial obligation. The cold, legalistic language mocked every childhood memory, every sacrifice, every whispered promise of future support. My parents sat there, a unified front of self-serving righteousness, their eyes fixated on the paper, waiting for my signature. My mother even had a pen ready, held out like an offering to seal my fate. For a fleeting moment, panic threatened to overwhelm me. What if they were right? What if I was being dramatic? What if I really could just figure it out, like I always had, and quietly accept this final, brutal rejection? But then, Alex's voice echoed in my mind. You deserve so much more, Em. More recognition, more appreciation, and a different voice, my own, clearer and stronger than ever before, cut through the panic. No, not this time, not again. The indignation that had been simmering for years finally boiled over. My hands stopped trembling. A strange, almost serene calm settled over me, the calm of absolute resolve. You want me to sign this? I asked, my voice surprisingly steady, almost amused. My father nodded, relief flickering in his eyes at my apparent compliance. Yes, Rebecca, just a formality, so we can move forward. Move forward, I repeated, a bitter laugh escaping me. Yes, I agree. It's time to move forward. I slowly, deliberately, folded the document, not once but twice, then tucked it into my purse. Their faces fell, confusion replacing their self-satisfied expressions. Rebecca, what are you doing? My mother stammered, her hand reaching for the pen. That's to be signed now. Oh no, I said, shaking my head, a slow, knowing smile spreading across my face. This isn't something I'm signing without proper review, and without my lawyer. The word lawyer landed like a bombshell. My parents actually flinched. They were used to my quiet compliance, not to legal terminology. My father's face reddened. Lawyer? Rebecca, don't be ridiculous. This is family business. Precisely, father, I countered, standing up, my voice gaining strength with every word. And it's clear you're treating it like a business transaction, so I shall too. I looked from him to my mother. You want to cut me off? Fine. You want to disinherit me in favor of David's latest delusion? Fine. You want a formal document releasing you from all obligation? You'll get it. But not before I make a few things very, very clear. I paused, taking a deep breath. And certainly not before you see what I have to show you. The mystery, the promise of a hidden truth, hung in the air. My parents exchanged a worried glance. They had anticipated a tearful outburst, not this cold, calculated defiance, and I knew, with a fierce certainty, that their carefully constructed facade was about to crumble. The living room was suddenly charged with an electric tension. My parents, their smug confidence dissolving, watched me with a mixture of apprehension and dawning panic. What do you mean, what you have to show us? My mother finally managed, her voice thin. Rebecca, this is absurd. You're making a scene. Am I, mother? I asked, my voice rising just enough to carry, firm and clear. Or am I finally pulling back the curtain on the scene you've been staging for years? I pulled my phone from my pocket, my fingers flying across the screen. You want to talk about resources? About investments? About who truly contributed to this family? Fine, let's talk about it. I had anticipated this moment, this inevitable attempt to disown me. For months, quietly, methodically, I had been compiling. Not out of spite, but out of a desperate need to document my own reality, to counter their gaslighting with irrefutable facts. I opened a file on my phone, a meticulously organized spreadsheet, linked to scanned documents and payment confirmations. Let's start with the help David needed, I began, my gaze sweeping from my stunned parents to the empty space where David should have been, conveniently absent from this confrontation. You claim you're pouring resources into his promising venture. Let's quantify what resources you've actually expended on him over the years, versus what I've contributed to this family. I held up my phone, displaying the spreadsheet. Here, I announced, is a detailed breakdown. Every loan to David that you conveniently forgot about, which I quietly covered. Every emergency car repair, every missed rent payment, every semester of community college tuition for classes he dropped after 2 weeks. All of it, meticulously documented, with dates, amounts, and source of funds. I paused, letting the implications sink in. And when the source of funds wasn't you, it was me. My savings from part-time jobs, my scholarship money, my birthday gifts from grandparents, money I earned and saved, not squandered. My mother gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. My father's jaw dropped, his face paling. They had never expected me to keep receipts. Totaling, I stated, my voice ringing with cold precision, approximately $75,000 over the last 8 years. $75,000 that went to subsidize David's perpetual adolescence. While I was told to be independent and figure it out, you prioritized a black hole over a solid investment. I then scrolled to a new section of the spreadsheet. And now, let's talk about my contributions to your household. My father sputtered. Rebecca, that's not fair. We paid for your upbringing. Did you? I countered, a sarcastic edge to my voice. Let's see. Here are the receipts for the repairs to the roof that leaked for 2 years because David forgot to tell you about it. The plumbing repairs. The new water heater when David left the cabin pipes to freeze last winter. The gardener you couldn't afford when you wanted the lawn perfect for your bridge club. The utilities I paid for 6 months when you were short after David's last investment failed. All totaling, I announced, the numbers a stark, undeniable testament. Another $20,000, money I quietly put into this house, into your comfort, while I was simultaneously told I was a burden and should be grateful for your support. My mother, tears now genuinely welling in her eyes, finally found her voice. Rebecca, you're fabricating this. This is a lie. A lie, Mother? I scoffed, holding up my phone. These are bank statements, credit card records, invoices, all dated, all verifiable. The truth, it turns out, is a lot messier than your carefully constructed narrative. The silence that followed was deafening, filled only with the frantic ticking of their internal clocks, counting down the seconds until their facade completely shattered. And I was just getting started. The air in the living room was thick with unspoken accusations and the undeniable weight of cold, hard numbers. My parents, who had always operated in a haze of convenient amnesia and subtle misdirection, were now confronted with an irrefutable ledger of their hypocrisy. You can't deny these, Mother, I stated, my voice firm, gesturing to the glowing screen of my phone. These are facts, not feelings, not vague memories. Facts. My mother, Maria, was reduced to sniffling, her usual dramatic flair completely extinguished by the shock of my meticulously kept records. My father, Robert, however, was regaining some of his bluster, his face reddening. This is an invasion of privacy, Rebecca. How dare you track these things? Invasion of privacy? I echoed, a bitter laugh escaping me. Father, for years my finances, my time, my emotional well-being were invaded by your constant demands and David's endless needs. I simply started keeping track of the damages. You want to talk about fairness? Let's talk about the countless hours I spent helping you with your taxes, organizing your paperwork, even building that website for your hobby, clueball unpaid, of course, because family helps family. My father fidgeted, glancing away. He knew it was true. My unpaid labor had saved them hundreds, if not thousands, in accounting and administrative fees over the years. And let's not forget the emotional toll, I continued, my voice taking on a more cutting edge. The constant anxiety of wondering when the next emergency call would come. The guilt trips when I tried to say no. The exhaustion of being your unpaid therapist, mediating David's latest crisis with his landlord or his latest girlfriend. You always said I was so strong, didn't you? What you meant was, Rebecca can carry all our burdens because she won't complain. My mother made a small, choked sound, her hand flying to her chest. She had used that phrase countless times, believing it to be a compliment. You speak of prioritizing David's future, I said, turning back to the disinheritance document on the coffee table. But let's be honest. David's future, in your eyes, has always been an open-ended investment account, constantly replenished by anyone foolish enough to believe in his fleeting whims. My future, on the other hand, was deemed self-sufficient enough to be discarded. My hard work, my scholarships, my consistent responsibility, those were not assets to be celebrated, but liabilities to be offloaded. You saw me as a guaranteed, stable entity that didn't need nurturing, leaving all your resources for your perpetual project. The words hung in the air, undeniable. My parents looked utterly defeated, their power drained, their authority evaporated. "This document," I said, holding it up again, my voice now resonant with a cold triumph, "isn't just a release of financial obligation, it's a declaration. A declaration that you are willing to disown a daughter who built her own success, in favor of a son who has consistently squandered every opportunity. You want my signature? You'll get it. But not before everyone understands the true cost of your unconditional love." I put the document back on the table, a silent promise hanging in the air. The truth, painstakingly documented, was their undoing, and the silence that followed was the sound of their carefully constructed narrative crashing down around them. The silence in the living room was punctuated only by my mother's ragged breathing and the soft, almost imperceptible hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. My father, having lost his bluster, now seemed to deflate, his shoulders slumping. He stared at the floor, refusing to meet my gaze. "You talk about family," I continued, my voice steady, imbued with the clarity of years of unspoken resentment. "But your definition of family has always been transactional. It's been about what I could do for you, not about who I am. My value was tied to my utility. My existence was a resource to be tapped, not a person to be cherished." I scrolled further on my phone, displaying another section of my meticulously kept records. "Let's talk about emotional support. Remember when I broke up with my first serious boyfriend in college? I called, heartbroken, needing comfort. Your response, mother? 'Oh, Rebecca, that's a shame. David just called, he needs help moving his furniture again.' My pain was an inconvenience, quickly dismissed in favor of David's latest mundane request. The memory still stung, a sharp reminder of how consistently my emotional needs had been trivialized. Or remember when I had that terrifying medical scare in my junior year," I continued, my voice barely a whisper, yet it cut through the silence like a scalpel. "I was alone, scared, and contemplating dropping out. I called, desperate for reassurance, for parental support. Your response, father? 'Rebecca, are you sure this isn't just stress? David's having a tough time with his landlord. Can you look over his lease agreement for me?' Their faces, which had been pale, now looked distinctly green. These were not public actions, but private, intimate moments of betrayal that cut deeper than any financial slight. "You see," I explained, my voice regaining its strength, "it wasn't just the money, it was the constant, insidious message that I didn't matter as much. That my struggles were insignificant, while David's were monumental. That my accomplishments were simply expected, while his minimal efforts were celebrated as triumphs. You built him up by tearing me down, by constantly diverting resources, attention, and validation away from me and towards his endless void of need. I watched as a single tear traced a path down my mother's cheek, but I felt no pity. It was a tear of self-pity, not genuine remorse. And now," I concluded, gesturing to the release of financial obligation, "you want to make it official. You want a document confirming that I am, effectively, no longer your responsibility. And David is your sole investment. Fine, but you need to understand that this document doesn't just release you from obligations, it releases me too, from the expectation to fix your problems. From the guilt of saying no, from the burden of trying to earn love that was never truly unconditional." I stared them down, their eyes now wide with a dawning terror, not for me, but for themselves. The silence that followed was the sound of a family irrevocably broken, not by my words, but by their own actions. And for the first time in my life, I felt truly, completely free. My words hung in the air, reverberating through the silent room, each one a hammer blow to their carefully constructed reality. My mother's quiet sobs intensified, morphing into a low, mournful wail. My father, utterly defeated, covered his face with his hands. They were witnessing the catastrophic collapse of their own narrative, and there was nothing they could do to stop it. "You see," I continued, my voice imbued with a newfound authority, This isn't just about the money or the emotional labor. It's about the truth. The truth that you actively cultivated a dynamic where I was always secondary, always the backup plan, always the safety net for David's spectacular failures. I walked over to the bookshelf, pulling out a dusty photo album. I opened it to a random page, filled with faded pictures of David and me as children. "Look at these," I said, holding it out for them to see. "Pictures of happy memories, right? But what you don't see in these smiles are the countless times I was told to be quiet so David could nap, or share your toys even when he never shared his. The subtle lessons that taught me my needs were less important than his whims. This wasn't just a childhood. It was a training ground for my role as your designated scapegoat and rescuer." My voice was devoid of malice, only a cold clinical analysis of their parental malpractice. "You constantly praised David's creativity or passion, even when it manifested as outright irresponsibility," I explained, flipping through the album. "Meanwhile, my actual achievements, scholarships, academic awards, professional successes, were met with dismissive nods. 'Oh, that's nice, Rebecca.' Very practical. As if practicality was a flaw, not a virtue. As if ambition was only valid if it looked like David's fleeting, dramatic pursuits. The irony was not lost on me, or on the now utterly silent room. My achievements, which should have been a source of pride for them, had been relegated to footnotes in David's endless saga. "You told everyone I was so independent," I said, turning the full force of my gaze on them. "And you know what? You were right. I am independent. Because you forced me to be. You made me learn to rely on myself, because I quickly realized I couldn't rely on you. And that independence, which you now see as a reason to cut me off, is precisely what allowed me to survive your disownment, and to thrive without your support." My voice gained a triumphant edge. "You inadvertently gave me the greatest gift, the freedom to build my own life, on my own terms, free from your suffocating expectations and conditional love." I closed the album with a soft thud, the sound echoing in the silent room. "So, when you consider this document," I said, pointing to the release of financial obligation, "understand that you're not just releasing yourselves from financial burdens. You're releasing me from emotional burdens, from the decades of feeling less than, from the constant striving for an approval that was never truly available. You tried to disown me, but what you really did was set me free." I took a deep, fortifying breath. The air, once heavy with their guilt, now felt lighter, cleaner. And I knew, with absolute certainty, that this was not an end, but a powerful, profound beginning. The silence in the room stretched, thick and suffocating, punctuated only by my mother's soft, hiccuping sobs. My father remained slumped, defeated, his face buried in his hands. They had no counter-arguments, no gaslighting tactics left. My meticulously presented evidence, combined with the raw emotional truth, had utterly disarmed them. "I want you to understand something very clearly," I stated, my voice ringing with a cold, clear authority that I hadn't known I possessed. "This isn't about revenge, it's about accountability. It's about shining a light on decades of emotional and financial manipulation that you thought would remain hidden, buried under the guise of family loyalty." I walked over to the living room window, looking out at the perfectly manicured lawn, a stark contrast to the chaos within the house. "You cultivated this image of yourselves as loving, supportive parents," I continued, speaking more to the universe than to them. "But your love came with a price tag, didn't it? A price tag paid in my emotional currency, my time, and often my own hard-earned money. You were constantly investing in David's potential, pouring resources into a leaky bucket, while my well, though overflowing with actual results, was deemed too independent to require your attention. The irony was a bitter taste in my mouth. Do you know what it feels like?" I asked, turning back to face their broken figures. "To constantly be the one who has it together, while secretly craving just an ounce of the concern, the fuss. The investment you so readily offered, David? To be told you're so strong, only to realize that strength was merely your permission to pile more onto my shoulders." My voice trembled slightly, the raw emotion finally breaking through the controlled facade. "It's lonely, it's isolating, and it chips away at your spirit, piece by agonizing piece, until you wonder if there's anything left of you. The pain of those years, once a dull ache, now felt sharp, vivid. My mother looked up, her eyes red and swollen. "Rebecca, please, we never meant to hurt you. We thought you were fine." David, he always struggled so much. Her words, even now, were a testament to their unwavering myopia. "That's the problem, Mother," I countered, my voice regaining its steel. "You thought, you never asked, you never saw. You projected your own anxieties and hopes onto David, and you projected your own perceived strength onto me. And in doing so, you created a reality that suited your convenience, not ours." I picked up the release of financial obligation again, holding it up like a trophy. "This document, which you so eagerly want me to sign, is actually the key to my freedom. It formally severs the last remaining ties of obligation, of expectation, of that toxic contract we've been operating under. You wanted to disown me? You succeed. But you also empower me." I smiled, a genuine, powerful smile that reached my eyes. "Because now, I owe you nothing. And for the first time in my life, that feels like everything." I placed the document back on the table. "You wanted to see what I had to show you? Well, here it is. My independence, my self-worth, my freedom. And that, unlike David's latest venture, is truly priceless." The silence returned, but this time, it was the silence of a battle won, a war finally ended. The aftermath of my revelation was less an explosion and more a slow, agonizing implosion for my parents. My mother, Maria, retreated into a cocoon of self-pity, her phone calls to relatives now dominated by tearful laments about her ungrateful daughter and how much Rebecca has changed. The irony was thick enough to cut with a knife. Her emotional manipulation, once so effective, now fell flat, tainted by the undeniable truth I had laid bare. My father, Robert, ever the pragmatist, was more outwardly furious than heartbroken. He saw the damage to his carefully crafted image, the loss of control, the public humiliation. He tried to spin a counter-narrative to distant relatives, claiming I was overly sensitive or mentally unstable, but the numbers and the cold, hard facts I'd revealed were hard to refute. David, predictably, was absent from the immediate fallout. He was likely too engrossed in his latest, doomed venture to realize the seismic shift that had just occurred. But his absence was also a testament to the core of the problem. He was always prioritized, always protected, always shielded from the consequences of his actions, while I bore the brunt. My mother's subsequent attempts to reach me were a mix of desperate pleas and veiled threats. "Rebecca, how can you do this to your own mother?" She'd text, followed by, "Your father is so upset, you're making him sick." Each message was a transparent attempt to re-establish the emotional chains, but they had lost their power. I simply didn't respond. The silence that followed my refusal to engage was a strange, liberating peace. My phone, once a constant source of anxiety, became quiet. No more urgent requests for money. No more dramatic calls about David's latest crisis. No more guilt trips about family obligations. It was as if a heavy weight had been lifted from my shoulders, a constant, low-level hum of anxiety that I hadn't realized I was living with until it was gone. The emotional space they had once occupied was now mine, a vast, open expanse to explore. My physical space, too, became truly my own. I finally felt comfortable investing in my apartment, decorating it not with an eye towards what they might approve of, but what truly brought me joy. I spent weekends pursuing hobbies that had long been neglected due to family emergencies. I reconnected with friends who had drifted away, explaining to them, for the first time, the true extent of my family's dysfunction. Their understanding, their validation was a balm to my long-wounded spirit. The vindication wasn't a sudden celebratory burst, but a slow, steady realization of my own strength and resilience. It was knowing that I had stood up for myself, spoken my truth, and faced the consequences head-on. It was understanding that their attempt to disown me was, in fact, the greatest gift they could have given. It was the gift of freedom, of self-definition, of a future unburdened by their conditional love and endless demands. And that, I realized, was a triumph far greater than any diploma or inherited fortune. The true and lasting consequences for my parents were not legal ramifications, but the insidious erosion of their social standing and the quiet fracturing of their carefully curated family image. They had always prided themselves on being the matriarch and patriarch, the benevolent center of the extended family. Now, that center was crumbling. Relatives who had once fawned over them, or diligently paid their respects, slowly began to distance themselves. Invitations to family gatherings became less frequent, or were subtly rerouted to avoid direct interaction. Phone calls were shorter, more formal, devoid of the intimate gossip and complaints my mother so thrived on. I heard through a mutual acquaintance that my mother was distraught by this social isolation. "Nobody calls me anymore," she'd lamented to a distant cousin. "I don't understand why everyone is so distant." The profound lack of self-awareness was almost comical. She genuinely couldn't connect my public exposure of their manipulation to the sudden chill in their social sphere. My father, however, understood the blow to his ego. He saw the dwindling numbers at his annual golf tournament, the fewer invitations to exclusive dinners. His power, once absolute within his immediate circle, was now visibly diminished. David, of course, continued his trajectory of self-inflicted chaos. His tech startup fizzled out spectacularly, leaving him with a pile of debt and a bruised ego. But this time, there was no cavalry. My parents, reeling from their own social ostracization and perhaps finally seeing the fruit of their relentless enablement, were less inclined to bail him out. And I, of course, was completely out of the picture. David was forced to take a minimum wage job, a humiliating blow to his inflated sense of self-worth. He moved into a dingy studio apartment, a far cry from the lavish lifestyle he'd come to expect, subsidized by my parents and, unknowingly, me. The silence from their end, once a source of anxiety, became my greatest comfort. My phone no longer buzzed with their demands, their guilt trips, their desperate pleas for attention or money. My calendar was no longer dictated by their manufactured crises. I had space, I had time, and most importantly, I had my own life, truly my own. For the first time in memory, Alex and I flourished. Our relationship, once burdened by the constant emotional drainage from my family, blossomed. We traveled, invested in our future, and built a life based on mutual respect, honesty, and genuine support, not transactional obligation. The vindication wasn't a sudden, triumphant moment, but a steady, quiet hum of contentment. It was seeing my mother's baffled despair, my father's impotent rage, and David's forced accountability. It was the knowledge that my truth, once ridiculed, had become their inescapable reality. They had told me they would disown me. And in that rejection, they had inadvertently opened the door to my own true self, to a life of authenticity and peace. It was the most unexpected, yet most profound gift they could have ever given. And it was a gift I cherished more than any inheritance. The quiet triumph of my new life was punctuated by moments of reflection where I processed the decades of subtle abuse and the dramatic, yet necessary break. It felt like shedding a skin, an old, restrictive layer that no longer fit. My own self-perception underwent a profound transformation. I was no longer the dutiful daughter, the silent helper, the reliable backup. I was Rebecca, a strong, capable woman who had built her own life, on her own terms, and who finally understood her inherent worth, independent of anyone else's validation. This self-discovery was intoxicating, liberating. I found myself pursuing passions that had long been dormant, suffocated by the constant demands of my family. I enrolled in a local pottery class, something I'd always wanted to try. The tactile experience of shaping clay, of creating something beautiful with my own hands, was incredibly therapeutic. I started volunteering at a local animal shelter, dedicating my time to something truly meaningful, without the hidden agendas or expectations that always accompanied family favors. These were choices made purely for my own joy and growth, a luxury I hadn't realized I was missing. My relationship with Alex deepened exponentially. He wasn't just my partner, he was my unwavering confidant, my anchor in moments of lingering doubt. He celebrated my small victories, listened patiently to my belated processing of past hurts, and offered a steady, unconditional love that was a stark contrast to the conditional affection I had known. We built our home together, not just physically, but emotionally, creating a sanctuary where honesty, respect, and mutual support were the cornerstones. It was a stark, beautiful contrast to the transactional emptiness of my childhood home. The most unexpected, and perhaps most meaningful, consequence was the gradual reconciliation with some of my extended family members. My Aunt Susan, surprisingly, was among the first. She reached out, not to gossip, but to apologize for not seeing my struggles sooner. "Rebecca," she said, her voice filled with genuine regret, "I always wondered why you seemed so tired, so burdened. I never put all the pieces together. I'm so sorry we didn't protect you." Her words were a balm to a wound I hadn't realized was still festering. Her validation, and that of other cousins and aunts who quietly reached out, was a profound form of healing. It was the acknowledgement I had unconsciously craved for years. The experience taught me that true peace doesn't come from avoiding conflict or silencing your truth. It comes from speaking up, setting boundaries, and allowing the consequences to unfold, no matter how messy. It often means losing people you once believed were essential to your identity. But the space they leave behind is fertile ground for genuine connections, for self-discovery, and for a kind of liberation that is priceless. My parents had tried to disown me, and in doing so, they had inadvertently handed me the keys to my own freedom, to a life defined by my choices, not their control. The quiet hum of my newly liberated life was a stark contrast to the cacophony of my past. The ghost of their expectations no longer haunted my every decision. My parents, after their initial flailing attempts to regain control and salvage their image, seemed to retreat into a state of stunned quietude. Their narrative of being wronged, of having an ungrateful daughter, still existed, but it was now a story they primarily told to each other, losing its power without a wider, validating audience. The social ostracization they experienced within the extended family, a subtle but persistent consequence, was a punishment far more effective than any direct confrontation. David, for his part, slowly began to navigate the world without his usual safety net. His trajectory, once cushioned by parental indulgence, now faced the unyielding reality of consequence. He continued to stumble, certainly, but the constant bailing out had ceased. He was forced to learn responsibility, albeit grudgingly. I felt no satisfaction in his struggles, only a detached sense of equilibrium being restored. He was no longer the golden child, forever exempt. He was just another adult, accountable for his own life choices. It was not a grand transformation, but a necessary recalibration. My own journey, meanwhile, continued to blossom. Alex and I cemented our future, exchanging vows in a small, meaningful ceremony that was entirely devoid of family drama. The guest list was comprised of genuine supporters, friends who had seen me through the darkest times, and the few family members who truly celebrated my newfound freedom. It was a day built on authentic connection, not forced obligation. We recently made the decision to start a family, a profound step that fills me with an overwhelming sense of joy and purpose. The thought of raising a child in an environment free from manipulation, where their worth is inherent and their voice always heard, is the ultimate fulfillment. Encounters with my parents are now rare and perfunctory. At unavoidable family events, like a distant relative's funeral or a formal wedding, our interactions are brief, polite, and emotionally barren. There have been no grand apologies, no tearful reconciliations. They haven't undergone a dramatic change, but I have. The weight of their expectations, the sting of their judgment, no longer defines me. Their continued insistence on their victimhood is their burden, not mine. Their silence, once a terrifying prospect, is now a cherished blessing. My strength, once exploited as their tool, is now entirely my own, wielded to cultivate a life rich with authenticity, joy, and healthy boundaries. The journey has been arduous, marked by pain and profound betrayal, but it has also been a path to self-discovery, resilience, and an unwavering sense of peace. They tried to disown me, and in their attempt to cast me out, they inadvertently handed me the keys to my own freedom, allowing me to build a life defined by genuine love and respect, a life I can truly call my own. The years following my declaration have solidified the profound shift in my life, transforming the once turbulent waters into a serene, expansive ocean. The dramatic confrontation in their living room, once a raw wound, is now a scar, a faded but powerful reminder of where I came from and how far I've come. The initial shock for my parents eventually settled into a strained, distant civility. They never offered a genuine apology, nor did I expect one. Their ingrained patterns of thinking were too deeply etched, their inability to admit fault too profound. They continued to cling to their narrative of my betrayal, but it held no sway over me. Their judgment, once so potent, had lost all power. My decision to formally accept their disownment by signing the release of financial obligation with my own lawyer present was the final, definitive stroke. It was less an act of anger and more an act of self-preservation, a legal and emotional severance that cemented my independence. That document, once a symbol of their power over me, became my emancipation proclamation. It was a tangible marker of my freedom, a piece of paper that represented the end of decades of conditional love and transactional relationships. David's trajectory continued its bumpy path. Without the safety net of endless parental funds, he was forced to confront the real world. He held down jobs, paid his own rent, and learned, through hard knocks, the value of responsibility. He wasn't transformed into a saint, but the continuous, unchecked indulgence had ceased. His struggles were no longer my burden, and that separation allowed him, in a strange way, to finally begin the painful process of growing up. Our interactions became rare, limited to brief, polite nods at extended family gatherings, devoid of the old resentment or his habitual requests for assistance. The silence was, again, a form of peace. My life with Alex blossomed into a partnership built on unwavering trust and mutual respect. We welcomed our daughter, Lily, into a home filled with unconditional love, clear communication, and healthy boundaries. The joy of raising her, free from the manipulative dynamics I endured, is my greatest vindication. Every time I tell her, "I love you," without a hidden agenda, every time I validate her feelings, every time I celebrate her efforts without comparison, I heal a little more of my own past. She is growing up knowing her worth is inherent, not earned through compliance. I rarely see my parents now. Our paths diverge entirely. The few times we are in the same room, a polite, almost antiseptic distance remains. There's no animosity, just a quiet understanding that our relationship, as it once was, is fundamentally broken and beyond repair, and that is perfectly okay. My strength, once a tool for their convenience, is now dedicated to building a fulfilling life for myself and my new family. I chose freedom over a dysfunctional sense of family. It was the hardest decision, but the best one. The peace that now permeates my life isn't a passive absence of conflict, it's an active, vibrant presence, born from the deliberate choice to reclaim my autonomy. The echoes of my parents' attempts to disown me, once sharp and painful, have softened into distant, almost historical facts. They are part of my story, but they no longer define its present or dictate its future. The initial shock and outrage from some extended family members eventually subsided, replaced by a quiet understanding for many. The truth, once spoken, had a way of settling in, resonating with their own experiences or observations. My parents, stripped of their primary emotional and financial resource, me, and faced with a damaged public image, found their world considerably smaller. Their attempts to manipulate others were met with increased skepticism. The constant demands they levied on David, though still present, lacked the same underlying confidence, perhaps because they now understood the true cost of enablement. Their disappointment in me was palpable, but it was a disappointment I no longer absorbed. It was their burden, not mine. Their silence, once a form of punishment, had transformed into my cherished freedom. David, for his part, continued his slow, arduous journey towards self-sufficiency. He learned to work, to save, to manage his own affairs. It wasn't a linear path, and I heard of occasional relapses into old habits, but the overall trajectory was one of grudging independence. He was no longer dependent on parental subsidies, nor did he look to me for help. This detachment allowed me to view him not as a source of stress, but as a separate individual finally grappling with his own life. The dynamic was broken, and that was the ultimate victory. My life with Alex and Lily is a testament to the healthy, reciprocal relationships I now prioritize. Our home is a sanctuary of open communication and unconditional love, a stark contrast to the emotional minefield of my childhood. Every decision we make for Lily is rooted in her well-being and emotional security, actively avoiding the patterns of favoritism and emotional neglect that defined my upbringing. I find immense joy in building a legacy of genuine connection and support, free from the shadows of my past. The true vindication isn't in their suffering, but in my flourishing. It's in the quiet confidence that comes from knowing I chose myself, spoke my truth, and built a life aligned with my values. They tried to disown me, expecting me to crumble. Instead, they unwittingly forged the strongest version of myself. This story isn't just about escaping a toxic family, it's about the profound liberation that comes from daring to break free, and the boundless possibilities that open up when you finally reclaim your own narrative. The distance, both emotional and physical, that has grown between myself and my parents and brother is now a comfortable, well-worn path. It's not hostile, but it is definitive. The attempts at disownment were a harsh, painful catalyst, but their ultimate impact was to clear the wreckage of a dysfunctional past, allowing me to build a foundation for a truly fulfilling future. My parents' world, once seemingly vast and influential within their social circles, continued to shrink. Their ability to command attention, to orchestrate narratives, diminished significantly. The exposure of their patterns of exploitation and favoritism at the family reunion, though they denied it fiercely, had planted seeds of doubt that quietly bloomed into widespread skepticism. My mother, no longer able to effectively wield her emotional blackmail, became increasingly isolated. Her dramatic pronouncements fell on deaf ears, and her attempts to elicit sympathy were met with polite but firm boundaries from other relatives who had grown weary of her constant complaints. My father, the strategist, seemed to lose his tactical edge. Without me as a readily available resource, and David as a constant, attention-demanding project, their lives became less about grand narratives and more about mundane routines. The financial resources they had once poured into David were now more tightly controlled, a result of their own diminished capacity and the stark reality of David's continued struggles. David, in turn, experienced a slow but steady sobering up. The enforced self-reliance, the lack of an immediate bailout, meant he had to confront the direct consequences of his choices. He eventually found stability in a trade, something practical and demanding, which finally gave him a sense of purpose and, more importantly, a reliable income. We still rarely interact, but the unspoken tension that once characterized our relationship has dissipated, replaced by a calm indifference. He is on his own path now, and I am on mine. The complex, tangled knot of our shared past has been unraveled. My life with Alex and Lily is rich with purpose and joy. Every day is an affirmation of the choices I made. We prioritize open communication, mutual respect, and emotional honesty, actively cultivating a family environment that is the antithesis of my upbringing. Lily is thriving, secure in the knowledge that she is loved unconditionally, her achievements celebrated for her own sake, not for comparison or validation of others. This new life, built on integrity and authentic connection, is my profound vindication. The peace I now experience isn't just the absence of conflict, it's the quiet confidence that I have honored my truth and built a life that reflects my values. They tried to disown me, believing they were punishing me. Instead, they pushed me onto a path of self-discovery and ultimate freedom. The story isn't one of bitterness, but of resilience, of breaking free from the past, and of embracing a future where I am the author of my own narrative. The passage of time has only served to deepen the chasm between my past life and my present reality. The initial pain of being disowned has faded, replaced by a profound gratitude for the clarity it forced upon me. It was a brutal awakening, but a necessary one. My parents, after their final, feeble attempts to regain control or re-establish contact, have settled into a quiet, almost resigned existence. Their social circle has dwindled considerably, a direct consequence of their actions and my unwavering commitment to the truth. The narrative they cling to, of being wronged by an ungrateful daughter, sounds increasingly hollow, even to their own ears, I suspect. They are isolated, not by my choice, but by their own. My mother's dramatic sighs and tearful lamentations have ceased to reach my ears, or anyone else's within our shared orbit. My father's attempts to assert control or manipulate situations have met with firm, polite resistance. They exist, yes, but their influence over me, and indeed over a significant portion of our extended family, has evaporated. It's not a victory lap, it's simply the natural consequence of their choices. The silence from them is no longer a source of anxiety, but a gentle, consistent reminder of the peace I have fought so hard to achieve. David, too, has found his own version of stability. Without the crutch of constant parental rescue, he was forced to develop resilience and resourcefulness. He still struggles, as all people do, but his struggles are now his own to navigate, not a family crisis to be solved by others. Our interactions remain minimal, cordial, but distant. The old resentments have faded, replaced by an almost clinical detachment. He is a person from my past, not an active participant in my present. The cycle of enablement has been definitively broken, and that, for both of us, is a form of healing. My life with Alex and Lily is a vibrant tapestry woven with threads of genuine connection, unconditional love, and mutual respect. We are building a legacy of emotional health and open communication, actively ensuring that Lily will never experience the kind of manipulation and conditional affection that defined my upbringing. Her laughter fills our home, a joyous counterpoint to the quiet anxieties of my past. Her inherent worth is celebrated every day, free from comparison or external validation. This authentic, loving environment is my greatest triumph, a testament to the power of breaking free. The greatest vindication isn't in witnessing their decline, but in experiencing my own flourishing. It's in the quiet confidence that I am the author of my own story, no longer bound by their script. They tried to disown me, to cast me out. But in doing so, they inadvertently gave me the ultimate freedom, the freedom to define family, for myself, on my own terms, with people who truly see, value, and cherish me. And that, dear friends, is a liberation more precious than any inheritance. The passage of years has only deepened the profound sense of peace and vindication that settled over me after that pivotal confrontation. The drama of being disowned, once a consuming fire, has cooled to embers, leaving behind a clear, unburdened path. My parents, after their initial shock and the subsequent futile attempts to reassert their control, gradually faded into the background of my life. Their presence, once a constant, demanding shadow, became a distant echo. The social consequences of their actions, subtle yet persistent, continued to isolate them within the broader family network. Their carefully constructed image of benevolent parenthood, once widely accepted, was now privately questioned by many, and openly dismissed by those who had witnessed my stand. My mother, stripped of her primary emotional outlet me, and faced with a dwindling audience for her laments, became increasingly withdrawn and self-absorbed. My father, the pragmatic planner, had lost his most reliable financial and organizational resource, leading to a noticeable decline in their meticulously managed affairs. They never expressed genuine remorse or sought reconciliation on my terms. Their pride, their entrenched worldview, and their inability to truly acknowledge their own culpability prevented any meaningful shift in their behavior. They remained trapped in their narrative of victimhood, but that narrative no longer held any power over me. Their silence, once a terrifying absence, became the blessed quietude of my liberation. David, too, continued on his path, albeit a more grounded one now. The absence of an immediate safety net, the forced self-reliance, slowly chipped away at his habitual entitlement. He held down a steady job, managed his own finances, and learned, through consistent effort, to navigate the complexities of adult life. While he never fully shed all his childish tendencies, the constant crisis-to-crisis existence that defined his past was replaced by a more stable, predictable routine. Our interactions remained minimal, cordial, and thankfully, free from the old patterns of dependence and resentment. He was no longer a burden or a source of anxiety. He was simply a separate individual on his own journey. My life with Alex and Lily is a vibrant testament to the power of choosing your own path. Our home is a sanctuary of unconditional love, open communication, and firm but compassionate boundaries. We are meticulously building a family culture that actively avoids the pitfalls of favoritism, manipulation, and emotional neglect that defined my upbringing. Lily thrives in this environment, her spirit bright and unburdened, knowing her worth is inherent and her voice is always valued. This daily affirmation of genuine connection and well-being is my deepest, most profound vindication. I rarely encounter my parents now. Our lives have diverged completely. There is no lingering bitterness, just a quiet acknowledgement that the unhealthy ties of the past have been severed permanently. The journey was arduous, marked by moments of intense pain and profound betrayal, but it was also a journey of immense self-discovery, resilience, and ultimately, unparalleled freedom. They tried to disown me, to cast me out into the cold. Instead, they unwittingly pushed me into the warmth of my own true life, a life I built, lovingly and deliberately, on my own terms. So, there it is. The complete, unvarnished story of how Rebecca, the perpetually responsible, overlooked daughter, was finally forced to break free from the suffocating grip of her family's conditional love and insidious manipulation. It's a narrative not of simple anger, but of a quiet, relentless fight for self-worth, a fight that culminated in a dramatic, public confrontation that, while terrifying, was ultimately the most liberating act of my life. I often wonder if, in their moments of quiet reflection, my parents ever truly grasped the depth of the damage they inflicted, or the profound irony that their attempt to disown me became the catalyst for my greatest liberation. My honest guess? Probably not. Their worldview is too self-serving, too meticulously constructed to admit such a devastating truth. And frankly, at this point, their understanding is irrelevant to my peace. My life now is a testament to the power of drawing firm lines, of choosing your own happiness, and of recognizing that not all familial bonds are worth preserving. Sometimes, the most loving act is to sever the ties that bind you to pain. The peace I inhabit now is not merely the absence of conflict, it is a deep, resonant calm, a certainty in my own path. It's the daily joy of building a life with Alex, a partner who sees me, truly sees me, and cherishes me not for what I can do, but for who I am. It's the profound satisfaction of raising Lily in a home where her emotional needs are met, where her individuality is celebrated, and where she will never feel the sting of comparison or the weight of unearned obligation. That, above all else, is my ultimate vindication. The ghost of the old Rebecca, the one who constantly sought their approval and yearned for their unconditional love, sometimes visits. A fleeting echo of past hurt, a pang of sadness for the family I always wished I had. But the new Rebecca, stronger and wiser, gently reminds her that true family is forged in respect, honesty, and mutual support, not in obligation or manipulation, and that the painful journey of severance was the only path to finding that genuine connection. This isn't just my personal grievance, it's a narrative, I believe, that resonates with many. The insidious patterns of favoritism, the subtle gaslighting, the quiet suffering within the guise of love. It's a universal struggle, played out in countless homes every day. So, as you've listened, as you've reflected on my journey, I offer this question to you, my confidants, my audience. Did I go too far in confronting them so directly? Or not far enough in simply walking away? Was the public exposure justified, or should I have endured their final betrayal in silence? Was this an act of necessary self-preservation, or a moment of understandable, if aggressive, retaliation? Let me know in the comments. Your thoughts, your perspective, are part of this journey. And perhaps, in sharing my story, it might just inspire someone else to finally write their own ending, to sign their own Declaration of Independence. Because sometimes, the only way to truly graduate is to disown the pain of your past and embrace the boundless freedom of your future.